Hi, it's Todd, and I'm going to talk about alignments. Alignments are an interesting subject. They sort of have a love, or people have a love-hate relationship with them, going back, probably almost to the very beginning. It's an interesting thing. Some people enjoy using them. I'm someone who is definitely pro alignments, but they definitely also have their detractors. And there's also many different styles of play regarding how to use alignments. And unfortunately, the books don't give a whole lot of context on how exactly, as a referee, to adjudicate alignments. There's a lot of latitude there for what to do, how far to go, how to play it, whether to play it at all. And some people are going to look at that as a feature, given that it is very much up to the individual group how they want to handle it, and others may look at it as a missed opportunity to give it some mechanical weight. But let's take a look at it, and maybe we can find some ways to bring alignments into the game, or to different ways, if you have alignments in your game, how you can sort of take advantage of them in a way that maybe is meaningful. But here's the 5th edition Player's Handbook, where I'll start. The alignments are on page, looks like 122. And if you've been playing the game at all for any length of time, these are sort of the classic, I guess, eight-pointed sort of stars. So you have the morality on either side, which has three, there are three different aspects. One is, good, one is neutral, one is evil. And then within those, what they call it, I think they call it an attitude. And that attitude is lawful, neutral again, or chaotic. And so combinations of those give you your different alignments. So lawful evil, lawful good, lawful neutral, chaotic good, chaotic evil, chaotic neutral, neutral good, neutral evil, or true neutral. And often what I think can be a frustrating thing, but makes sense from a player standpoint, is that you're going to tend to pick the most expansive alignments, because as far as it goes in 5th edition, it's really only a stick. There's no real carrot for playing your alignment. No classes really have an alignment requirement anymore. A lot of the spells and items and things that used to in past editions have requirements or be tied to specific alignments are gone. So there's very little to gain from picking a more restrictive alignment, other than if your referee in your group, is strict about alignments, that they're going to ding you on, right? If you take lawful good, you're going to be tied down to a bunch of restrictions that you don't get if you're chaotic good. And then if you're chaotic neutral, you have, which is how a lot of people like to play it, no restrictions at all. You can go however the wind blows, whatever your fancy, however your fancy takes you as a player. From moment to moment, you can just indulge in it because, hey, you're chaotic neutral. Now, I don't really agree with that particular reading of it, or there are other readings that maybe can give some guidance, or rather bring some structure to even chaotic neutral. But I can see why players who don't want to deal with somebody telling them, hey, you can't do that in a dungeon or in whatever thing they're doing at the moment, would want to pick an alignment that is going to make them the most free. Because really, why not? What is the point of picking an alignment where someone is going to be telling you, if you as the player decide as a character, I want to do X, someone else is going to say, no, you're that's against your alignment. So there's an appeal there, right, for just going ahead and saying, you know what, I don't want anybody to tell me what's right or wrong, or what I can do or what I can't do. So I'm going to go ahead and take the alignment that lets me do whatever I please. And going back to, say, something like 1st edition, there were certain classes, I think the Druid by default, and also for sure the Paladin, where they were the ones that were actually called out in the Player's Handbook as saying there's a lot of latitude for a lot of characters, except if you're a Paladin or a Druid. And then you have to pay attention and really stick to it. But then again, there were benefits. Druids and Paladins were powerful. Paladins in particular had a lot of abilities that you had to roll really high just to think of becoming a Paladin, and you had those abilities. So there was a benefit to playing that alignment if you had it, because you gain something. But by the time we get to 5th edition, the benefit is really gone. And so all you're left with is something that has a higher requirement as a player versus others that don't. So a lot of players are just going to go towards the easier, the lower hanging fruit. Now, with all that said, I actually don't mind taking a alignment with some restrictions. I think there's fun to be had from the tensions between what is maybe the most efficient thing to do as a player versus what your character thinks is right or wrong. And I think there's a lot of fun that can be had there, but not everyone's going to think that way. That's really going to be game and player specific. So we can see the problem here. If there's no incentive for someone to take a tougher alignment and play that tougher alignment, not that everyone's is going to gravitate towards the easy ones, but you can see why a majority of players may go the easy path. It just makes sense. There's always going to be that player that wants to take on a challenge, that wants to be into role-playing these kind of inner conflicts. But the game doesn't really reward you for that. Beyond what you get, your own reward. As a player, you may find it rewarding to get that, but the game itself is not rewarding you anymore for doing that. So, why do that? Now, there are options here, and I'm not going to go into sort of what each alignment means. I think you can read up on it. They kind of make sense when you just think about it. Lawful good tends to be on the side of law and, is going to tend to want to respect laws. I always think of someone's chaotic good who respects good, but if they have to break laws to do that, they will. Neutral is more in balance, can kind of go either way. And then, on the flip side, they sort of have their mirror counterparts on the evil ones. But there's a lot of leeway even in those definitions, which is maybe why it can be difficult as players and referees to sometimes manage expectations with alignments, because one person's chaotic good could be another person's chaotic evil. One person's lawful good might be another person's chaotic good. And these are things that if you're going to take with alignments, it will probably be worth going through and setting up your expectations in a session 0 or as far ahead as you can as to what you mean by each alignment, or get to a shared understanding of your alignment. For example, a lot of people will point to, say, Robin Hood as the example of chaotic good, but you can really make an argument that he's lawful because really Prince John is sort of usurping the government and is an unlawful ruler. And I don't think that someone who is lawful necessarily has to follow the laws of someone who is basically an usurper. King John has at least worked to keep his brother in prison, and instead of trying to do the lawful things, which is get the rightful heir back to his throne, he's abusing his power. I don't think that Robin Hood really wants to break the laws because he feels like they don't matter. I think he's willing to do what he does because it's an unlawful ruler, and therefore the rules are being broken by that person, and there's sort of this unjust standard that's being applied. By the same token, flip it around, the guards who are working for the Sheriff of Nottingham doing all these dastardly deeds, are they lawful just because they're doing what they're told? Certainly the modern understanding of things would say no, that they're not, that they know what's right and what's wrong, and the kind of moral laws and the laws of God and the laws of, these kind of higher laws would indicate that you don't do it just because, that your boss tells you to do it. And therefore, in this kind of system, that makes it technically covered by the law, right? They would say, no, you're supposed to stand up and that it's wrong to do that. And so you shouldn't do that. So even in a case where a lot of people would say, oh yeah, Robin Hood is sort of the poster boy for chaotic good, someone else like myself could say, well, not so fast. You can see him being played in sort of the light of a lawful character. It comes down to really how you define what it means to be lawful and, what it means to follow laws versus break laws, or laws with a lowercase l, which may be the laws of a particular town or city or state or country or kingdom, versus maybe capital L laws, which would be stuff like the, in a Christian background, maybe the 10 Commandments or some other kind of, Arthurian knightly code, or, divine laws, laws that the universe recognizes. And they're not always, obviously often they're not the same. And someone who follows that higher capital L law could be considered lawful, even if in following those higher laws, he must break the lowercase l laws of a particular place. And that's kind of a good segue. I'm going to show now go back to the beginning, which is always a good way to look at things. We go back to the very start. Alignments were there all the way back in the white box, but they had a very different feel to them. There's only there's really one axis, two sides, two poles on that axis. One is, or really three, because there's the middle. They still have neutrality, but there's basically law, chaos, and in the middle, neutral. And there's nothing else. There's no concept of good and evil. I think law definitely skews towards good and chaos skews towards evil, but there are there can be exceptions to that. But the way that this really came out, it seems to me, and I'm not necessarily a particular historian of this, but it's really based on the kind of Michael Moorcock kind of concepts of law and chaos from the Elric of Menebony series and those books. And when you're looking at it here, what you're really doing is you're basically siding with one cosmic team versus the other. So you're either taking the law side, you're either on the law team or on the chaos team. But the scale of this, kind of like in the Moorcock books, right? It's cosmic. It's over the entire multiverse. It's not really concerned with the particular things in a particular kingdom, in a particular village. I don't even think it really, someone could be supporting the rule of law and breaking all the laws of a particular place, right? The lawful that you are, that team you're on is the battle, and that conflict has such a higher scope that probably as a mortal, or even as maybe an advanced mortal as a hero, we have no understanding of the full scope of everything. We've just kind of chosen our team. Which side are we on? And there were consequences to which side you chose. Not so much in enabling an ability, but certainly spells and items and language was based on alignment. There were alignment languages, and I think even in first edition, alignment languages are still there. I don't know exactly when they went away. I'm pretty sure they're gone now. But it wasn't just, hey, you can talk to people of the same alignment, though you could. It was something that, they'll actually tell you that if you're speaking, say, the alignment language of law, and a creature of chaos hears it, they will attack you, because now you've been exposed as being of that other team. And so hostilities will commence. So it is not only a way of communicating, it was a way of kind of outing yourself or identifying yourself as of one of these two, warring tribes. And then neutral in the middle, you're kind of not involved in that, but you don't get some of those benefits that those other alignments provide. So by not picking a side, you kind of lose out. And the concept of sort of looking at it as teams is very interesting, because even in the book, if you can look here, they basically give you the rundown of who's on each team. And some of them have multiples, so they can, men can be on any team. But, so if you're neutral, you get to hang out with the Nixies, Pixies, Dryads, and Griffins and animals. Elves can bounce around through a couple of different ones. They can be on law, they can be on neutral. Again, chaos side has evil high priest, kobolds, goblins, hobgoblins, gnolls, giants, ogres, wraiths, mummies, vampires. Dragons can be neutral or chaotic. I'm not sure they had the concept of sort of lawful dragons yet, but whatever. So even when you're going through this, creating your character, you can basically look at this list and pretty much say, which creatures do I want to be aligned with in this big struggle, and kind of go down the list. And then once you've picked that team, you sort of get access to the language of that team, which is great if you need to communicate with them. But the downside is if someone from the other team hears you with that, then, they're going to attack. So there's a drawback even to using that alignment language. So it's a very different alignment look. And you can see here from the little blurb, there's really nothing about it as a determinant of character behavior. There's nothing that says what you must do if you want to remain on the law team, or what you must do if you want to remain on the chaos team, or even if it's even possible to switch teams. There's nothing here that says that, hey, if you don't act lawful, then you're going to get kicked from the law team and end up on neutral or chaos. And I think that's because it's really, again, it's less about trying to regulate your behavior than more about this idea of picking sides and sort of where that puts you on the multiverse stage. You're just obviously just a tiny little speck on that stage, but where do you belong and who do you side with? And I think that a lot of people, look back at that and they miss it because it is much simpler. It is something that has more benefits, given that you can run into things that can, I don't have it here in this book, but that can affect you given whatever alignment you are. I mean, there were definitely spells. There's protection from chaos, protection from law, all these kind of things that will affect you or not affect you depending on your alignment, but that it doesn't have the sort of constraining factors that came in with, I guess, first edition would probably be the first one that had sort of the classic approach. So I think it's certainly possible in the modern game, in 5th edition, for example, to try to bring back some of the carrots and sticks that made alignment interesting and useful. I think as a referee, if you're planning on a campaign in a session 0, maybe you'd certainly want to look at how do you want to look at alignment. And I think that there's a couple of useful distinctions you can make. One of which is, are you looking at it as a prescriptive sort of measure or as a descriptive measure? And what I mean by that is a prescriptive measure is one that's going to tell you how you should act. You're lawful good. This is what lawful good people do. Therefore, this is what your character should do because he's lawful. If you're doing it more as a descriptive style, it's more based on what the character does than defines what their alignment is. Do you do things that are lawful good? If you do, you are lawful good. If you stop doing things that are lawful good, then you are no longer lawful good. I like to kind of combine the two myself. I think when you're doing character creation, then you are choosing an alignment as a prescriptive thing. You were saying that my character, when he enters the stage of the game, he begins play, this is how he is. But then after that, or how she is, but then after that, how they act will then adjust their alignment. So it's almost as if that original alignment is who you think you are. And then over the play of the game, it changes, it becomes, who you really are. So you may think you're lawful good. And that's probably true of, anybody throughout history. Probably a lot of people don't consider themselves to be, say, chaotic evil. Maybe they all think they're good, upstanding citizens, but it's skewed by their perspective, right? So then you get outside that and then you kind of judge them on sort of the merits or not of their actions. And then you say, boy, this is an awful person. But in their mind, they feel like they're, a hero doing hero's work. And so by the same token, that original alignment is sort of maybe their internal view. How does this character see themselves? And then through play, maybe they will be that way, or maybe their actions will expose them to being, some other alignment. You thought you were, this paragon of law and good, but really you're chaotic evil, and your actions bear that out. You may have thought that inside yourself you were this way, but the reality is you're something else. So how do you then take these choices and you say, okay, I'm going to say it's basically descriptive, but what does that mean for the characters? Well, if you have a group that really likes role play and get into sort of these internal motivations, you don't necessarily have to do anything. I don't always feel like you have to necessarily have a carrot or something, but oftentimes you maybe have a mix of players, and some of them are just going to play their alignment because that's part of their character concept. And so they look at that and they say, yeah, this is who I envision him. And I enjoy having these limits and having something to give me sort of guidelines. And I'm going to play that because it's fun for me to play that and play with that tension. And then you're going to get another player who thinks to themselves, I don't want to do that. I want to just go and murder hobo my way around or just dungeon crawl. And I don't want to be concerned with not being able to do this thing because of that. And how you kind of get maybe someone of that approach to want to play it more is you have to give them some reason to. And out of the box, the game doesn't do that. The modern game gives absolutely no reason to really pay much attention to alignment. So how are you the referee? How do you introduce some kind of concept to give players a reason to play it? There's a game called Pendragon, which is all about sort of high Arthurian adventure. It's kind of, I don't know, fairy tale, sort of low magic. You have things like Merlin and trolls and things like that, but you don't have lots of player character magic users and people, flying around and doing crazy stuff. But what I really appreciated about that system, where it has kind of a set of traits and a set of sort of, I forget the name that he gives for them, but basically sort of characteristics about your character. And a large part of the gameplay comes from this tensions of looking at these things about your character and either fighting against them or going with them. And obviously when you're doing these two things, maybe you have, someone has insulted you, at a courtly affair, at a courtly gathering. And so you have maybe a high sense of pride. And so there's this, and so that tells you, hey, I should, challenge this man because he has challenged my, my honor, my sense of honor. And you don't want to do that because maybe this is someone important and for other reasons, so, but the game forces you to say, he really would do that. So now I know that. So I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to roll, I have to roll against this pride. And if I make the roll, then I'm able to kind of swallow it and do what I need to do. But if I fail, I'm going to have to go and challenge him. Or I can maybe say, well, I have this other aspect, which is, fealty to my Lord. And so I'm going to try to use that to help me overcome my pride. And so you're rolling with, for, or against these different things that are sort of part of your character. And you can kind of bring some of these aspects to your side to then help you with a bonus to do something else. It doesn't always have to be necessarily fighting one of your other traits. It could be that you're in battle and you're fighting for your Lord. And again, you use that fealty for Lord to help you when you're on this charge of the lance to help you in combat, right? And so you could try to roll to try to use that to try to basically give you a little extra juice in that next combat roll. And those are the kind of things that I think any kind of player can get behind, right? If you have your alignment and you could say, hey, I want to play into my lawful goodness because these guys, I'm fighting against something else to maybe give me advantage on the next roll. Or in a non-combat situation, same kind of thing. I'm addressing a lord and I want to use my sort of lawfulness to kind of give me some extra help on this negotiation so that they'll help us, as one sort of lawful person to hopefully another lawful person help out. So that you make some kind of roll and then maybe you get advantage on the next thing that you're trying to do, right? If you can use that to your benefit, you get it. At the same time, as a referee, you could say, hey, I need you to, you want to torture this kobold. That's not lawful. I need you to roll, against your sort of lawfulness to determine whether or not you can go through with that. And then maybe there's something else, again, you have the two axes, right? You have lawful and you have good. Well, maybe what you're torturing, you want to torture that kobold for would mean something very positive. So you say, I want to leverage my goodness. It seems weird and probably torture is not a good example for this, but if we don't get this information out of this kobold, thousands of people in this town are going to die. So I need to use this to help override this other thing, right? So I'm going to try to use this to help me get over that so that I can do this thing that I need. And again, the torture example for probably someone who's lawful goods is not probably the best one. But I hope you can see where I'm thinking of if you can leverage sort of the mechanics for, in D&D or in 5e, the sort of disadvantage system, you could probably think of other ones to sort of leverage these alignments to give people reasons to use them. And then by using them, sort of, they're interacting with these tensions of being lawful or being good or being evil or being chaotic And you could probably come up with different ones, which if you'd like I said, Pendragon's a very good example. It has a ton of different traits and things that it draws from. And it might be overkill, I think, for something like D&D to throw all those in there, though you probably could. But again, sort of your alignments can become sort of a shorthand for those. And once you come up with those, then you could say, hey, my brand of lawful good is this, and like I was saying about kind of having expectations, if you're going to have someone who's lawful, maybe you have them write down what their code is, or here are the things that he will do. Here are the things that he absolutely won't do. And then if those things come up in play as a player, if they're coming up something way you can use, you might call them out. As a referee, if you feel like there's something that comes in play, maybe a negative way, you can call them out. And hopefully you get to a point where maybe a player will be invested in the character. Well, they'll call them out themselves and say, hey, I want to do this, but my character is super anti that. So I need to try to overcome that, or, overcome this aspect of my character. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to do it. But the one thing that's missing from this, if you're going to have these interactions, what are you rolling against? So, maybe you want to give numbers, or I think you need to give some kind of numerical figures to these. And maybe you have two axes. One is your goodness, and one is your, lawfulness or chaoticness. And maybe one's positive. You can have 10 to 0, and then if you get to 0, you start going to 10 the other way, and all that, so that you end up with a number that you can roll on. Maybe it's given that 5th edition sort of a D20 type system, maybe you make it 10, or even maybe you can be a little bit higher, maybe 15 on the super high end, and then it starts to go down to 0, and then it goes up to 10 or 15 on the other high end, so that you end up at a place where maybe you start off at 5 or 8 or 10 to give you about a 50% chance of making it. And then really gives you a chance to settle in your campaign how important this is, right? You could say, hey, I'm just going to have from 5 to 5. And if you're going to get advantage, it's going to be a small chance. It's just little swings I'm looking for one way or another that you can try to get. Or you can say, I want to have big swings. So I'm going to say you can go all the way up to 15. And that way you have a really good chance, if you're very much a paragon of your particular alignment aspects, then you're going to have a really good chance of doing it. And it's also going to be difficult not to, because everything has that negative side, right? If you have a 15 in law, then it's going to be really good for you when you want to try to engage that to do something. At the same time, when something comes up that is clearly not of law, or doesn't match with the traits that you may have written out to say how you are dedicated to law, then it's going to be very hard to break it. So it's got sort of the higher numbers you get, it's both its own carrot and its own stick, because you're going to be more lawful, you're going to be more rigid, but you're going to get that benefit. And then if you're not, then yeah, it'll be easier to do what you want and sort of play the wind, but you're not going to be able to call upon it very much to get the benefit out of it. If you only have a 1 or a 2 in law, then it's going to be very hard to use it to your advantage. Whereas if you have 15 or however high you want to go, 18 in law, then it's going to be really easy to get that advantage. And, as a referee, we can set some guidelines. Okay, maybe you can only use it once per combat. Maybe you can only use it once, maybe once per interaction. You can use it. Maybe if you succeed, you can get another chance at it. But if you fail, you've kind of, that well of inspiration is dry for maybe 24 hours until a long rest, whatever. I mean, you can come up with the details to make it better for you. The point is that now you have a reason for people to really kind of think on their alignments and put them into play. And so now, instead of someone saying, well, I just want to be neutral, blah, 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 and you're saying, that's fine, but you're not going to, neutral is basically zeros. So you can be neutral all you want, but you're never going to be able to get advantage on anything. So if you're really in dire straits and it really could help to get that, I think, +5 or whatever advantage turns out to be on a D20, yeah, it'd be nice to be able to have that. It's kind of like having an extra inspiration in your pocket. And you're not going to have it because you're neutral. So, go for it. If you want to actually make a stand and sort of take on, some of that restrictions, you're going to get a little you're going to get a little bonus out of it because now you have access to extra advantage that you don't have. But then there's also the price. So it kind of can be however much your players want to invest in it, that's what they'll get out of it. And I think coming to that investment, the next question might be, well, how do you come up with a number? How do you decide what number those things start at? And I would say, again, let them be prescriptive to start. Let them say, hey, I want to be 15 in law. I want to be 15 in evil or whatever it is. And let them go with it. Because the other thing of this is if you are continually swallowing down your aspects to do something against them. So for instance, if I keep saying I'm lawful, but I keep rolling against it to try to do something unlawful, then my law should start ticking down, right? So maybe I start at 15. Yeah, I'm the law guy. I'm Mr. Lawful. I'm basically an old school paladin. And I'm constantly trying to roll to not do something. And I succeed a few times. Every time I succeed, maybe, okay, at 15, I succeeded. And now it's 14. So I did something unlawful, but now I'm not quite as lawful as I was. And I do that again. And it's a little bit easier for me not to be lawful. And a few things go by and then I do it again. I roll, I succeed. Okay, I do that unlawful thing I want to do. Now it's 13. And so the more you use it or the more you fight against it, then you start to lose it. And I can gain it back again, and you can make that as easy or as hard again in your campaign to gain those things back. If I want to say, and I would say it's not when you use it for your advantage that you should gain it back. It's not that here's a demon and I'm, lawful and I'm going to use the power of law to smite him. And I do that. And so, yeah, I get more law. That shouldn't be it. Really what it should be is, to go back to the torture kind of example, I know that it would be expedient to get what we want by torturing it. But I know that as a lawful person, I shouldn't. So even though the easiest thing for my character would be to either to stand by and let somebody else torture this creature or for me to torture them myself to get the information I want, I'm not going to do it. And I'm going to stop it because I know that is against my law, right? That's when you should get one back, right? You should get one back when you take the harder path to stick with your alignment. That should be what improves your alignment. And so what we end up having after all this is done is this nice little system whereby you play your alignment and you can then use it to gain advantage. Or you go against your alignment, which you can also use to try to do something. You fight against it so you can do something else. And I would say that we didn't really talk about the penalty. So if I wanted to do something, I fight against my alignment, I fail, maybe I get disadvantage on that roll to do it. Maybe the Dungeon Master says you just can't. You could play it either way. It's really about how easy you want it to be for people. Maybe just disadvantage is enough. Some things may not have rolls, and then you may have to figure out what to do if I have a guy who's tied up in the torture part, maybe I get disadvantage on the intimidation since that you really can't stop me from torturing them, but the effectiveness is off. However that is, you can figure that out. But what we end up having is this kind of system whereby you can take your alignment, you can turn it into sort of advantage. It can also be advantageous to you, and each player can choose how much they want to invest in this system. If they just want to be free as a bird, they can stick with neutral, be zeros, and be done with it. If they want to, really take advantage of these advantages, take advantage of the system, then they can buy in and have a chance at advantage, but then also have the price attached to it. So you're not forcing players to take it. You're not forcing someone who doesn't want to be bound by alignment into it. But maybe if those players who are looking at it and they're skeptical, if they see the other players being able to turn the tide in a certain way or gain something out of these advantages, maybe they think to themselves, man, I could use that. And maybe I want to. And the nice thing is that they're not locked out because they can just start investing and doing something with law, right? If they say, well, I was neutral, but I'm going to start doing stuff to engage in this aspect of law that maybe I didn't know I had and now I've recently discovered, they can slowly start ticking themselves up on the law side of, of their character, or the law side of the ledger, basically. And maybe they'll just head 0, and then they'll have 1, then they'll have 2, and yeah, it'll be hard and they won't get it, but they can work their way up. And that can be a goal for them that gives them a way of discovering their character through play. If they started off as somebody, Han Solo type, they started off as a guy who's only out for himself, and then by, the end of the first arc, they've discovered they had this other gift and that they had a purpose that was more than that. And, that's him embracing, goodness or law or both, however you want to look at it. And that becomes something these characters can do. So I'm going to stop this here. I hope I've talked a little bit about alignment and maybe a way that you can use it in your game that gives players a reason for putting effort into the system, and not just a way, and not just something that they look at as maybe just some avenue that a referee can ding them if they want to. Something that has some consequences, but also has some benefits. And, I'm not pretending that this system that I've just kind of come up with here is going to necessarily work for everyone or couldn't be tweaked, but hopefully it'll give someone an idea of a way that they can make sort of alignment more of a living thing in their game than it is now. Something that isn't just looked at as, when it comes up, that people just roll their eyes and say, oh gosh, alignment, please, I hate it. Oh, why can't it go back to when it was nothing? A way that, it can be a benefit to the game and not just something to smack players with. Anyway, if you like this, please think about subscribing. I'd love if you feel like contributing. I have got a Patreon. The link is in the show notes. If you want to help me out that way, that'd be great. But that's all I've got for now, and I will talk to you later.